Steve, artificial intelligence, it's exploding.
Yeah.
Can we say it's a new technology?
It's an iteration. The transformer and the large language models, I think, are the new bit.
Yeah.
Like ChatGPT.
So the latest version essentially is like a late-breaking, new technology, taking the world by storm. Everybody's talking about it, and they are applying this technology to lots of different things, training it in different data sets to do different types of things. Like I read that they compared it to, they gave it general knowledge that like a college student would have, and it's like, it can be a very good college student, right?
Yeah, that's about the level that it's at. Yeah.
However, there is an application here that eventually might be very good, and that's applying this to medicine and diagnosis.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Like, I'm ready for it. Is it ready?
It's not ready yet, but I've been following this very, very closely. There was a recent study where they basically gave a ChatGPT the USMLE exams. This is a 3-part exam that all doctors take towards the end and after they complete medical school, and you have to pass this exam in order to get licensed in the United States.
So for clarity's sake, though, they took ChatGPT 4, I think it is, right?
Yeah.
And now they had to train it first, right?
Well, it's out of the box the way it has been trained.
Oh, you mean this is straight up like...
This is just ChatGPT.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't specifically trained on medicine. Oh, that's hugely different than what I was thinking. Okay.
And they just said, how does it do on the USMLE exam? And it passed. Just barely. It's like hovering around the 60% level, which is like, so it said right now, the knowledge that's in there in the large language model is about equivalent to a newly minted, medical school graduate, not somebody who's then gone through years of subsequent training, not a seasoned clinician.
Right.
But this is only factual knowledge, right? But medicine requires more than just having facts at hand. It also requires decision making and the ability to recognize patterns, right? So like making a diagnosis is saying, like, you have these 5 symptoms, what are the different possibilities, which ones are more likely than the others, and then where do we go from here?
But wouldn't it be good at that?
Well, that's a question. We can't assume that, because just having facts is not the same thing as making decisions or charting a plan, charting a course forward.
Okay.
So a more recent study wanted to look at that. So what they did was they took 36 vignettes. Vignette is like a medical story, like a presentation. Like you have a patient this old, with these symptoms, a history of this, right? That's a vignette. What do you think? What do you want to do? They took it from a standard medical text, and it did, and then they basically had to generate an initial differential diagnosis, a plan of care, and then once it was given the answers to those questions, what's the final diagnosis? It did best on the factual questions, like just its fund of knowledge, like the USMLE exam. It knows stuff, right? It did pretty well on the initial differential diagnosis, like what are the list of possible diagnoses. It scored around 70% or so. It didn't do as well in like charting a plan, but did pretty well there too, maybe 60%. And it did best on the final diagnosis. Once it had all the information saying this is the diagnosis, again, it was like 70-something%.
Wow.
So again, it's sort of, it's right in there. It's sort of at a low level medical, expert, not like enough that you could rely upon this as to actually make clinical decisions. And there was the problem that we've come to call hallucinations, where these large language models, again, they're predictive models. They're language predictive models. They're not, they don't know stuff. They don't think, they don't understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We've played around with them quite a bit. They're still very brittle. It's just predicting like what's the next word, and if you give it a large enough database, it actually produces a pretty good simulation of natural language and knowledge, but without any actual inherent understanding that we think of as like human understanding.
There's no mind there.
There's no mind there, right? So it's doing pretty well. What's I think most impressive about it is that this is ChatGPT. Yeah. This is not like a specially trained medical large language model.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Just so because I want people who don't understand that to understand it. So when we talk about ChatGPT 3.5 or ChatGPT 4, We're talking about different versions of a piece of software that is this artificial intelligence software. It's general. It's not general.
Generative pre-trained transformer. That's what the GPT stands for.
Yeah. And this version of artificial intelligence it's not general AI.
It's narrow AI.
It's narrow AI.
Right. But it's generative narrow AI, which means it's not just copy pasting or just looking up information. It's generating new text, although it's derivative. It's based upon everything out there that it's been trained at.
Right.
It's pre-trained, right? So they basically, here's the internet, here's all, just a massive amount of information, just pour through that and just make this predictive model of, if you ask a question or make a statement or whatever, it then just sort of generates typical text. And it's amazing how well it does, given that that's how it operates.
So
because of its generative and it's predictive and statistical, it could say stupid things and doesn't know it's stupid. It's just like statistically, these two things are likely to be associated with each other. So I'm just going to associate them together.
So every once in a while, it can come out with nonsense.
It just spits out. In fact, like even with this recent study, it can generate fake but authoritative looking references, like cite fake journals and fake doctors and fake studies because it's generating them. It's like the art generative programs like Midjourney or whatever.
Yeah.
It's creating something that looks like, you could even say, give me a painting that looks like a Picasso, and it'll give you a painting that looks like a Picasso. It's not a Picasso.
Yeah.
It's a fake Picasso, but it looks like one.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. It gives you a fake medical reference that's not real, but it's sort of generating it in the same way. It has all the form, and the words and the verbiage.
Yeah, it matches it. And
it matches it in how it's organized.
And it will fool you if you didn't know the difference.
Of course.
So there's multiple questions here. One, I've read that that the developers are, of course, trying to fix these hallucinations. Trying to like program them out of it. Again, you have to be an expert in programming to even approach this. We don't need to
get into the technical.
We don't need to
because we can't get into the technical.
Yeah, we don't need to. And it's irrelevant. It does.
Yeah.
Of course, they're working on it. They're trying to make it better. They're trying to do that. That's number one. Number two, it did all of this though, trained on the general internet information as of I think,
which includes a lot of medical sites.
Of course, it does. But the point is though, it wasn't specifically trained on medicine.
And that's correct. Nor was it only trained on authoritative medical sources. Right. So I think it's not only. So if we were going to make a medical GPT rather than a chat, just general GPT, if we were going to make a large language model, generative transformer, pre-trained transformer for medical applications, you would want to give it all of the medical knowledge in the world and none of the bullshit, right? None of the just people, just writing on the internet or Reddit or whatever about, making up their own stuff. So that would presumably, you would think, would function a lot better. So you need to do a couple of things. One is you need to give it access to the deep web, right? Not just stuff that you could find through Google, but like databases that are out there. This is, of course, getting easier to access, but there's a lot of
things behind a paywall.
Things behind paywalls, for example. Yeah. So every sort of peer-reviewed medical journal, right? I want access to all of that. And there are databases out there that right now that, it could be trained on. But also like authoritative reviews and commentaries and practice standards and practice guidelines and things like that. All the information we would want it to have and exclude non-expert, information.
What would that be like? I mean, where would that come in at?
And if you can do that and combine that with some kind of reference check to make sure that its references are actually real, so how would this be used? So I think the best use would be as what we call an expert system, which doesn't mean that the system is an expert. It's a system that is used by experts, right? So a physician could, for example, take the patient's symptoms, type them into, an AI, GPT style diagnostic application, and be given a suggested differential diagnosis, which might include some things in there that don't make any sense in the context of the patient. It probably include things that any competent physician would think about, but it might throw in something that you didn't think about. That's like, that's a legitimate suggestion. It didn't occur to me.
Yeah.
But I could see how this could be. This could be a presentation of that, and it also would suggest studies. that you could do, which again, which shouldn't be totally a revelation to a physician, but again, it might suggest things like, oh, like make sure you do the MRI scan with contrast or whatever, just making sure that, you order the right studies. There are multiple layers in place already to make sure this happens, but this would be yet another layer.
Yeah.
And then at the end, once you get all the data back and you put it in there, what it's really good at is saying, well, this is the most likely diagnosis, that pattern recognition, you're putting everything together. It's also good at, something that's been like a promise of electronic medical records from the beginning, which really hasn't been come to fruition, at least not the way it should. And that is putting in a layer of quality control, like saying this patient should be on aspirin to prevent heart attacks. And I don't see that they are on aspirin. You should consider starting this patient on aspirin. That kind of thing. But imagine an AI would be much better at it than just the sort of dumb algorithm in an electronic medical record system.
Yeah, of course.
Trying to say, oh, there's an incompatibility here, like you shouldn't be on these two medications. That's the kind of thing that already happens. But even beyond that, just another layer of quality control that's sort of always running in the background, always there. There's the potential here to significantly reduce misdiagnoses, reduce delay in diagnoses, reduce errors in medicine, and also just make medicine more efficient, so to get to the answer more quickly.
Yeah.
And anything that increases the efficiency of medicine could save not only lots of time and suffering, but billions of dollars.
Yes,
right?
of course,
so
yeah.
The potential here is huge. We really do, in my opinion, and there's a lot of people working on this. Like, this is not my idea, right? This is obviously an obvious idea. There's a lot of people that are working on it. There's tons of studies happening. Like, the direction forward is pretty well marked out. But what I'd like to see is like, okay, like the government say, all right, good. Here's $10 billion, make it happen as fast as possible. Let's put together like all the resources we need. It would be a worthwhile investment.
Absolutely.
For the U.S. government, like their biggest expense now is like Medicare and Medicaid. One of the biggest expenses. They have a ton of money on the line. Any money the government invests in improving the quality of care and the efficiency, the cost effectiveness of medical care, they will make back tenfold.
Yeah.
So this is a worthwhile investment. This is right there waiting for us to take it.
I mean, it's like, it seems like all the puzzle pieces are there.
They're all there. Everyone knows what needs to happen. It's just a matter of making it happen.
All right. Let me ask you two questions. What's the best case scenario of this? Give me the best version.
I kind of just outlined it. I think the best case scenario would be a centralized endeavor, well-funded, to make all right, here it is. We are going to put together, access to a database. And not only is it like a static database, it's a constantly updated database.
Yeah, so it's
medical
constantly
database,
getting new information.
constantly with the most updated information, and then have people like AI experts working on developing a medically dedicated form of GPT, of a large language model. And not only just create it, but then iterate it, improve it, tweak it, monitor it. And this becomes just a resource for everybody. Like, this is, any clinician on their desktop should be able to access it. And
for humanity. Yeah,
and basically have this expert medical system there looking over their shoulder, just as another layer of quality control and optimizing cost effectiveness. Again, the potential is to really make a significant leap in the quality of healthcare. And because the thing is, in the last, especially over the course of my career, the last 20 years or so, but even obviously before then, one of the main challenges that modern medicine has is we're overwhelmed with information. There are literally tens of thousands of studies published every year. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands, but even relevant to any specialty, there's thousands of studies published every year.
How do you navigate?
How do you navigate all? Just to be full-time job, just trying to keep your head above water, trying to keep up with the latest stuff, keeping it all in your head at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that we have information overload, in a good way, but it's a real challenge.
But it still needs to be digestible.
We need these tools,
because essentially, and what you're saying to me is that for most doctors, they don't have the time to digest this information, and it is something that they should know.
Well, so there's multiple things that we do, right? So there's, you have to get continuing medical education credits. You should be, taking seminars, and also you should be reading journal articles as they come out. And, if you belong to a society, like an organization dedicated to your specialty, they will push, like, here's the critical updates that you need to get. Like, I'm I have a couple of subspecialties in neurology, and I have to take an exam every year. And it's like, all right, here's 30 articles that you should have read, and and read them, and we're going to test you on them.
Wow. Okay.
So there's a lot of layers in place to make sure that we're keeping up to date, but it's good. It's better than nothing, but you still get overwhelmed by all the information out there. And so anything that helps us sort of wrangle all of this data and get to the bottom line of this is the standard of care, this is what you should be doing, it will improve the quality of healthcare.
It seems like this is a no-brainer, but I gotta ask you this question: what's the worst case scenario?
Well, I think the worst case scenario would be that this doesn't happen, or that there's I think centralized or consensus application out there, and you end up with a bunch of crappy ones, right? And I think there's a potential for abuse, and where that comes in is if you have kind of a low rent version of this that gets out there and people use it as a doctor.
Like a home doctor.
Yeah, right. So they use it as, instead of going to a doctor, I'm going to go to the doctor AI on the internet, ask them what disease I have, and then it'll give me a list of all these horrible things I now have to be worried about. So people already do this.
They're using Google.
They do that with Google. Before the internet, they would go to the bookstore and buy a book of self-diagnosis. I mean, people always do this, and it drives a lot of anxiety. Drives a lot of self-misdiagnosis, and this will feed into that if used improperly. So the negative effect would be a bunch of people, either treating themselves or being preyed upon by snake oil salesmen, or just, going to their doctor saying, hey, I ChatGPT told me I have ALS, and which could be a good and a bad thing, right? Because it could sort of overwhelm primary care doctors with people who are just trying to now correct the misinformation they got on the internet. But it does give them the opportunity to correct the misinformation, but it's just now a huge demand on medical services, basically just correcting misinformation.
So it seems to me, though, that if it did so well with just general information that's on the web without having the expert information, and again, AI is in its infancy.
I know this is step one. So I in 5-10 years, it's good. It's if we keep moving in this direction, you have to think that it's going to be way more effective than it is now. It's already just peaking up above the waterline in terms of minimal, like it could pass the boards, it can pass these basic exams, and it could generate a fairly decent differential and often come to the correct diagnosis. And there's lots of other ways that AIs can help with medicine as well. Being thorough and consistent is one thing that an AI does better than people, right? So, and this is already happening, but again, there's been now with this type of application, AIs reading X-rays, for example, they won't miss stuff because they don't, right? We get fooled, right? We might overlook something, or we're biased by our preconceptions or what we expect to find. This has been clearly documented. There's the famous gorilla in the basketball. There was this study where they showed radiologists a chest X-ray, and there was literally a gorilla in the middle of the chest X-ray, and 20% of them missed it. Because they weren't looking for the gorilla, so they didn't see it. Yeah. But AIs don't get fooled that way, right? Because that's not how they work, So there's already, we're already using algorithms that help us detect things on diagnostic studies. So this has the potential to take that up a level as well. Or making diagnoses in ways that we don't even make now. So for example, AIs are really good. This kind of generative AI is really good. This pre-trained AI is really good at pattern recognition, right? That's how it basically functions. And so it may clue into things that statistically have a dramatic effect, collectively, statistically have a dramatic effect on what the most likely diagnosis is, but are not the kind of thing that doctors pay attention to. And so you end up with a completely different way of approaching a diagnosis and coming up with statistical answers. That could be accurate.
Wow.
And so, that smells like Alzheimer's. What does that mean? They're already doing this. They're looking at all the things that are just associated with the diagnosis. It's like Amazon predicting what you want to buy in ways that you don't even know. You didn't even know you wanted the thing, but Amazon knew you wanted it because it's using an algorithm to piece together all these things. We can leverage the same approach to make a diagnosis, or at least suggest this person should be screened for this diagnosis because all the flags are there, like all the signs are there. If you are an AI that can pour through their life's data,
I would imagine someday, it may be in a slightly dystopian future, like people will be going to AI doctors.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think you'll have AI doctors when you have a general AI, like when you have a AI that can think like a person can. Then they can do anything, theoretically. But before that, with narrow AI, I think if we go 20 or 50 years in the future, even prior to a general AI, I could certainly see a situation where you go to an AI first, whether it's online or at a kiosk or in whatever, and you're in a doctor's waiting room, the AI basically does their assessment of you, and then you see the doctor and it has the AI's assessment all ready to go, and then now he's just sort of confirming and putting things in context and maybe making higher level decision things that the AI is not good at. So I could see that happening, but basically seamlessly being incorporated into it.
But imagine let's take it a step further. You have some type of artificial intelligence, whether it's general or whatever, but you go, it makes a prognosis, it administers medications.
Well, so then the question is, just like when we have over-the-counter medications, at what point are we going to have over-the-counter AI, right? Are we going to have artificial intelligence where legislatively they say, okay, we're going to give it this much freedom. We're going to let it do, make these kind of recommendations without a doctor's oversight, or you know what I mean? And then there's a certain level that triggers now you need a physician oversight. It's kind of the same thing we do with nurse practitioners and et cetera, is that there are certain things they could do on their own. There are certain things like prescribing opiates, whatever, where you need a higher level of oversight. AI, I could see fitting into the same thing where, at some point we'll decide, okay, it could make these classes of recommendations just all by itself. And also know when it's you should see a physician for this problem, right? Know when to bump you up to the next level.
Wow. What an interesting potential future out there. My God. Imagine a facility where you go in and it's all done by machine. It says you need surgery. We got to remove your kidney, whatever. You go in and then a machine does the surgery, right? It's incredible.
And then just one final thing, the other level is just like you could have, your Amazon or thing running in the background, like OK Google or Siri or whatever. They might be at some point say, "Oh, I've noticed you've been coughing a lot recently. You should get this checked out," right? Or you haven't been sleeping well, monitoring you in the background when you're not even aware. Gathering a lot of health information and then triggering, an algorithm saying you need to be concerned about this, or
that's definitely going to happen. That's really cool.
You didn't get your 10,000 steps today or whatever, or maybe tracking your calorie intakes. You hit your limit for today's caloric intake. You should stop now.
Or nagging you to go get a vaccine. Or
something. You're due for this or that, which that could be good. But there's lots of room for exploitation as well.
And we don't want pseudoscience to get their hands on it.
Which they will. Which they absolutely will, unfortunately.
Thank you for answering the question, doctor.
Right, anytime.
Do you ever walk around like this with your sterile?
You only do that when you wash your hands and you're going into surgery. In that between those 2 points, but I don't do surgery.
But you just walk down the hallway.
Not since I was a medical student. Not down the hallway, no.
Love that. Doctor. Thank you, Steve.
Sure.